don't know what the time is, but I think we can get started. Let me just double check. 32. Okay, I think it's fine. We can get started. So welcome to lecture 8. Today we're going to learn about a very important topic of networking. So this is actually historically this has been a two-part series. So we teach the basics of networking, and then we get into like the nitty-gritty details through a demo. But from past experience that 2 lectures is actually not even enough. It's a really complex topic. So this semester, we've decided to split it up into 4 lectures. So this is just going over the basics, kind of explaining how things work. And we're going to have, at the end, a little interactive demo with Postman. Okay? So before we get started, just some announcements. P4 is due today, but the normal stub days apply. And as you may have seen already, the mentorship form has already been sent out last night. And the deadline is due tomorrow, 11:59 p.m., so tomorrow night. We're kind of sorry for like such a short turnover, like you only have around 24 hours to fill it in. But the form is pretty short. And yeah, if you guys did not manage to make the mentorship event, the slides is posted on the Ed announcement, so you can feel free to look at that. And as always, if any questions, like make a private post on Ed. I guess this is just also for the people watching the recording, but it's a lot better if you post on Ed. Like on an anonymous post, because any TA can get back to you, and it's also faster like that. So please don't email us. But of course, like if it's like some private thing, you can also still email us. But in general, if it's course related, project related, assignment related, try to post on Ed. Okay, cool. And so after you fill in the form, we're gonna just do some fancy hand matching algorithms, and we're gonna announce the matching on Wednesday lecture. And just an obligatory post. The add deadline and the drop deadline is those 2 numbers. We're going to be following the 7-week course structure. So the the drop deadline is not this Wednesday, but actually in April. Okay, and the add deadline is, I think that's Wednesday. Yeah. So yeah, any questions about this? Cool. All right, let's get into the review. Okay, there. So as always, join with your NetID for some juicy extra credit. And yeah, at the end of the semester, we're going to tally up the points, and the top few are going to get like a small little prize. But yeah. And so when we post the recordings to YouTube, this audio gets copyright claimed. But I think the audio is an integral component of doing a Kahoot, so I'm going to have it in here anyways, and we just cut it out afterwards. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We're missing 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Or maybe I can't count. All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, let's get started. So the Kahoots for this time, we're going to review stuff that we taught last week. So actually, before that, we're going to go over some logistics stuff. So why should you sign up for the mentorship program? Nice. So these are all things, right? These are all things why you should sign up for the mentorship program, and no downsides, only benefits. But yeah, so sign up. Cool. All right. Now for more like logistical type of questions. Now, when is the mentorship form due? Nice. Tomorrow night. Yeah, so not Wednesday night, but tomorrow night, because today's Monday. So tomorrow is Tuesday. Nice. All right, very nice. Okay, so now these are actually iOS questions. Which of the following is best to use to implement this? So we have a table view, a collection view, a UI scroll view, or a UI Netflix view. Nice, very good, right? Because if we go back to the media, we see, right, that I'm not sure if, hopefully people have used Netflix before, but just kind of looking at this, you can kind of infer that you're not scrolling up and down. Oh, sorry, you are scrolling up and down, but you're also able to scroll left and right? There's a vertical scroll, there's also a horizontal scroll. So in order to have this, be able to scroll in multiple directions, you need the flow set up in the UI collection view. So that's the most effective way of setting it up. But with that being said, you could still implement this using a table view and a scroll view. It's just not as natural, okay? And I don't think we've ever mentioned this, but the UI scroll view is kind of like the parent of table view and collection view. UI scroll view is basically any view that you can scroll, right? But being that high level, there's a lot of details that you need to implement yourself if you were to use a UI scroll view, which is why it's not the most natural, okay? And UI Netflix view is not a thing, so if only, I wish. Cool, so good job to EW438 making the comeback. So what is one reason why you would use a collection view over a table view? Nice, right? As we mentioned just now, if you want to be able to scroll in multiple directions, you probably want to use the collection view, right? Because it has that functionality implemented into it. Whereas in the table view, the natural way to scroll is just up and down, right? You have rows as tables. Okay, cool. Nice. All right, last question. Now, we've talked a lot about collection views. What if I want to set the spacing of a collection view? All right, and no, green is not the answer. You're assuming that this is an assignment that you want to do by yourself, right? Very good, right? You would, no, wait, sorry, no, not very good. Okay, so let's think about this, right? So, yeah, I just assumed this was the answer, but apparently it's not. Okay, so this is actually a trick question, right? If you want to set the spacing of a collection view, you actually can't, right? What you want to do is you want to set the spacing of the layout, because the collection view by default, it's not something that you can set the spacing of. Okay, so again, this is the trick question. Remember, the spacing is not set in the collection view, but set in the layout of the collection view. Okay, nice, good. That one person, I guess we would see him in the leaderboard, him or her on the leaderboard. Okay, so in third place, EW438, second place, TP284. And getting 5 out of 5, we have AC2622, right? Good job. All right, so let's get into the lecture today. All right. All right, so we did the review. Today, we're going to talk about networking. So this is the structure. There's not much of a demo today, so most of it is going to be me here lecturing. So if you have any questions, you can just raise your hand and just interrupt me at any point. And if I'm talking too fast, you can tell me to slow down as well. So overview, we're going to first talk about the basics of networking. So what is networking? Why we need to do networking and stuff like that. And then we'll get into the details of what a request and a response code is. And finally, we'll talk a bit about the structure of the data that you're sending across in both your request and your response. So networking, right? Basically, it means you're connecting your app. So this is an iOS course. We're building apps. You want to connect that to the internet. So why do we want to do that? Let's first consider a couple apps that you may have seen before. Okay, so we have Facebook. These are kind of old screenshots, but you can still kind of tell. This is Facebook. We have Gmail. We have Google displaying some search results, right? So how do they kind of display that, right? So let's take a quick look at, say, Gmail, right? You can by now probably tell that this is probably some form of maybe table view, right? We have rows here, and then you can set up a little icon and the timestamp and a star on the side. But where does the data come from, right? So in your P4 assignment, how you may have done is you set up a model for the email or a model for your data, right? And on the very top of one of your files, you probably define an array, right? You do email 1, email 2, email 3, email 4. But what if, say, I have 10,000 emails, 20,000 emails? You're not going to define everything there, right? So that's going to be an issue, right? So this is a summary of what we've been doing so far. What you probably do is you create a model, you create an array of objects or dummy data, right, using the model, And then when you're setting up your table or your collection view, what you do is you do the self a row at that point, you just index into your table, right? You're basically using your array as the data source. That's great if you want to just learn how to set things up or just have local data. But if you want to implement something like an email, right, where someone else can send you an email and you want to dynamically add things to your email, or if you're implementing, say, something like a newsfeed, right, where there's constantly influx of more data, this is not going to work. So again, right, these are the issues that we are facing. And now right now everything is manually defined. If you want to add more things, you have to update your code and then rerun everything. And as you guys have already experienced, right, running things on Xcode takes a while sometimes. So the solution is networking. And how do we do networking? So networking, there are a bunch of there's multiple ways of communicating over the network. The one we're going to be focusing on is called HTTP. It's Hypertext Transfer Protocol, right? And the way it works is we visualize everything in terms of clients and servers, okay? So in iOS development, the client is your phone, your app, right? And the server is just something else on the internet, some other computer, maybe it's some other phone. You don't really care about that. All you really think about is just some other computing device somewhere else, okay? So let's break down this protocol, okay? So on the left-hand side, we have the app, that's the client. Oh, I forgot to put the client tag, but that's the client, right? On the right-hand side, we have some device, right? Something that has like a CPU and a GPU and can do computing, right? So the way it works is first, your client sends a request to the server, right? Say, please give me my emails or please give me my grades, right? And the server is like, sure, right? Here's your grades, right? And then it responds. So one very important thing to remember is that the client does the requesting and the server does the responding, okay? A common misconception is, say for example, I want to implement push notifications, right? So push notifications is an idea where your phone is just like doing its thing, but then suddenly the server tells you, oh, you have a new email, right? Now that doesn't work using like this request and responding data, this client and server model, because the client is the only party that can do the requesting. You can't have the server send the request to the client and be like, you have a new email. If you want to implement something, say like push notifications, there's like another way to think about it, but we're not going to go into that, okay? So remember, the client does the requesting and the server does the responding. So again, this is just like another way of like describing it. So the internet is basically a bunch of devices talking to each other or computers talking to each other. The client are basically devices of software that will call other services, right? So the idea of like the client requesting. And the servers are the ones that are called by, hence they do the responding. So before we dive into how this request is done, or like the structure of this request, I first want to talk about what a URL is. A URL, or otherwise known as the Uniform Resource Locator, is basically this long chunk, right? I took this image online. Hopefully they don't sue me. But this is kind of like the skeleton of what a URL is, right? You don't have to know like everything here, but this is just like so that next time you see a URL, you have like a more detailed understanding. So the first part is either HTTP or HTTPS, right? HTTP is Hypertext Transfer Protocol. HTTPS is Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secured, which is better. And that you don't really have to care too much about. What you do want to know, or like keep in mind, is the domain name. So we can skip that. The domain name, that's kind of like when someone says, I have a website, right? That's like where the website is. Say www.cornell.edu, that's a domain name. That's kind of just like the most general place where the website is located. So I like to give the analogy of like physical mailing addresses, right? So say I want to mail like a piece of like parcel to you, right? Your domain name would just basically be like what street you're living on, right? The port is kind of like, so on the street, there are like multiple numbers on the street, right? That's kind of like what the port is, right? And then the path to the file can just be like, oh, I live on 312 College Avenue, apartment 50 something. I'm sorry, I was about to say my address. But the apartment number, right, you can think of it as like the path to the file, right? So basically, you're going from general to more specific. And this, we're going to get into more detail later when we're talking about GET requests. But these are like specific parameters which you want to like request from the location that you're kind of, So yeah, let me start again. So these are like specific specific questions, right? Like key value pairs that you're kind of requesting from the domain name and all the way up to the path. So you can again think about this as, say, I'm sending a parcel to you, right? And I want you to make sure that you're there to sign it, right? So for example, in key value, you'd be like required authorization equals true, something like that, right? So that's the structure of a URL, right? And I skipped over the last two parts of like the anchor and the scheme, right? Because those don't really matter. Those are more for like when you're serving a website, and the anchor is like specific part in the page. But we don't really care too much about this that part, because now like all we're really using the URL for is to send our requests. Okay, so basically we're sending our requests to a specific location, and that location is defined by this URL. Okay. Before I move on, any questions about this? Nice, great. So now let's break down the HTTP requests. Okay. So remember, one more time, the client is doing the requesting, the server is doing the responding. So this is what the client will send the server, okay? HTTP request. So there are multiple requests, right? There's get, there's post, there's delete, there's update, there's more, right? But 99% of the time, you're only using the first three. And in fact, most of the time, you're only using the first two, right? So get. Get is basically the most like, used to like send small bits of data, right? You want to just, you're either like sending 1 to 2 lines of data, or you're retrieving data. That's the main use for get, right? So for example, say I'm trying to like get an updated list of the student rosters in this class, right? I will send a get request to some endpoint defined by Cornell, and they will give me the list of students enrolled in this class, right? That's the idea of a get request. The post request is used for kind of sending and like creating data, which the server will store, right? So get is retrieving data, put is kind of putting data into the server. And finally, delete, it's kind of based on the name, is you're not sending data, you're not getting data, but you're telling the server to kind of delete some data in like the backend representation of the model. And these, the get, the post, the delete, these requests kind of form a paradigm of CRUD, or like create, retrieve, update, and delete. So we're not going to go into too much detail in how you want to set these up. This is a very important paradigm to keep in mind when you're designing a backend where like a bunch of other clients can respond to. If you want to learn more about this, we do have a backend course. You can check that out on our website, or if you're interested, you can sign up for that next semester. But for what we care about, we're just going to interact with the backend. We keep this CRUD model in mind, but we just use it in terms. We interacted with it in terms of these HTTP requests. Okay. So we talked about the requesting part, right? The client sends an HTTP request in the form of a get, in the form of a post, or in the form of other requests, but usually it's get or post, right? And the server will respond, right? The server is like, sure, here's your data. So how does the server respond, right? The server will send you the bit of data that you request, or maybe it won't send it to you because, say, like you're not authorized or you don't have the right credentials, right? But along with that is a very important piece of information, and that is called the response code, right? So the response code is a 3-digit code, like that. The first digit in the 3-digit code is the category, right? And the second two are the actual code. So what is a category? The category is basically where did the error happen, or like, sorry, not error, but where did what happened to the request, right? So in the terms of it being like 5, for example, that's where the server had an error. So your request was fine, right? But the server messed up. So it will respond to you with code that begins with 5. If, for example, you sent a bad request, right? Say you're trying to log in, and your username and password is wrong, right? Then it will send a client error. You made the mistake, right? 3, 2, and 1, those are like, 2 is very common if it actually works, right? But 3 and 1 is less common and less, we don't really interact with it very much. But just for the sake of completeness, 3 is when they want to redirect you. So say, for example, you're sending a request to a like some URL, right? And that URL has migrated. They moved it somewhere else. So instead of you just being like 404 not found, they'll redirect you to the new address, right? Or assuming that the backend is set up decently, it will redirect you to the new address as opposed to just failing, right? And 1 is just more informational. Say like, yeah, 1 is more informational, so you don't really have to care too much about that. Cool. So we talked about the category. Now let's talk about the actual code, right? So the code is the 2-digit number at the end, and these are just some common ones. There's a lot more. It goes like, it's very, very long. And I think at this point, you don't really need to memorize any of these. In fact, you don't even need to memorize any of these, right? Just one Google search and you can just find the list of all these and just Command F for the relevant one you want. So you don't have to memorize them, but as you do more of these networking parts of like iOS programming or any other form of programming, these just become like more and more familiar. There are a few very important common ones though. I think just knowing these just will help you understand what the error is or what's going on very quickly. So 200 is the one which you should be very happy about. 200 means it's good, right? Everything's fine. 301 is basically it's been moved permanently, right? That's the idea of basically say you're sending a gift to a long lost friend, they give you your address and they've moved, right? They're not even in the country anymore. So that gift hopefully will get redirected to them, right? That's the idea of being moved permanently. 403 forbidden means, say for example, you're sending a request, but that's locked behind a login, right? You're trying to access your bank account, but you forgot your password, right? Then forbidden, you can't go in. Too bad. 404, I think a lot of people have seen this before. That's not found. So you're sending a request to somewhere, and there's nothing exists there, right? That's 404 not found. 410 is gone. It's very similar, right? 500 internal server error. So I guess if you're doing the backend course, 500 is what you should be very scared about because that means the backend is down. But for us, or iOS programming, if it's 500, just say during the hack challenge, you send a screenshot to your backend members and be like, oh, my fault, right? So that's something you can think about. Cool. So we talked about the response now, right? Remember, request, we send an HTTP request, and response, it gives you a response code. So there is one bit of detail that I glossed over, right? When the server responds, it gives you some chunk of data, and you kind of need to parse that data, right? That's a bit more complicated, and we're not going to go into detail about how you do that this lecture. We'll go back, that is what we're going to be focusing on next lecture and the lecture after that. So you can look forward to that. So just barring that small bit of detail, now we kind of know how this request and response works, right? You request data, the server sends you data. But now there's one a little bit of detail that I kind of missed, right? Where, say for example, you're building an app, right? You're building an email app, and you have your email model, right? Remember of the MVC paradigm, but you say you're working with a backend member, and they have their representation of an email, and it may not be the same, right? So you're sending them some email. You're sending them some request for an email. They send you their representation, and you're like, this is not what I want, right? So a way to kind of bridge this error is using a standardized way of like communicating and sending things back and forth. And that's where JSON comes in, right? JSON, otherwise known as JavaScript object notation, is basically a way of representing data in terms of key value pairs, okay? So, key value pairs, you can think of like, say, a dictionary, right? You index into the JSON using a key, and then it returns you a specific value. So the keys, these are just like some specific details to JSON, but the keys are always strings, right? And the values can be anything ranging from a string, some object, some integer, some boolean, some array, or null, right? And it could be a combination of these as well. So say you could, I guess I have it on the next slide, but you have a instructor, right? So the key of instructor corresponds to a value of an array, but in that array you can have more JSON, right? And the JSON is kind of indicated with this squiggly bracket. So it can be nested. And as you can see, this leads to like a bunch of like a lot of possibilities. And yeah, so that's the idea of using JSON. So we use JSON to standardize the way we communicate, right? So basically we send, the server sends us some data, we turn that into JSON, and then we process it. We want to send stuff to the server, we turn it into JSON, and then we send it over, okay? So we're like standardizing this form of communication using JSON. All right, so that's, actually went faster than I thought. That's the kind of crash course of how networking works. Now, the purpose of this demo today is just for you guys to just play around with sending requests. So setting up networking calls or requesting or like however you want to call it is kind of involved in iOS programming. But that's a detail we're going to save for the next few lectures. Today we're just going to interact with some backend that I set up already using what we call Postman. So you can send requests using the terminal. You can send requests into iOS app. You can send requests using Unix bash or like whatever. But by far the cleanest or most user-friendly way is using Postman. So let me quickly show you what Postman is. And no, stop. And as I'm doing this, feel free to download Postman. So you just do Postman, and then you go here. And actually, no, download Postman, and you just download it depending on what you have. So I already have it downloaded, so I'm not going to download it again. But I guess I'll give everybody 3 minutes to just download Postman, and we'll take off from there. Okay. What? Oh, no worries. Yeah. I got a bit scared. All right, who's still downloading? Everybody downloaded? Good, great. So when you launch Postman, okay, no. Okay, I'm just gonna quit it and open it again. If it decides to load, here. So you may or may not have like some onboarding screen. You just ignore that. Just click whatever that gets you past it, and then start creating a request. Okay. So I actually haven't. I've only really like touched this like very surfaces of using Postman. I just use it to like test endpoints. But there's a lot more complicated things you can do. You can set up like automated testing. You can have like there's a lot of very cool and fancy things that you can do with it, which I don't know. So I'm just going to show you like the very basics, and it will actually get you pretty far. So you can ignore all. I actually never used any of these things here. I've only really used collections. So we're going to talk about collections. So collections you can think of as basically a bunch of requests, right, that you are basically sending. So over here I have some folders, right? What I do is I create a new folder for every project I'm working on. So over here, this is the iOS demo. So this is like all the requests that's relevant to what I'm showing you today. Let me move my face here. Okay. So under this collection, you can create a new collection right now if you want to, or you can just have a bunch of requests on the side and format it later. So I have a very simple Hello World demo here. And actually, sorry, but before I even get to that, the URL, right, or the domain name, so I showed you guys, I explained to that just now, but like the overarching address, right, of where we're sending all our requests to today is here, networking-demo.herokuapp.com. Okay, that's something I set up earlier. So before you guys get into all the stuff down here, let's try to get this networking request set up first. So what you do is, I'm just going to do it here with you guys. So I create a new request, HTTP request, and then I put in my URL. So I forgot what it was, but it's this, right? So HTTPS, S for secure, ://networking-demo.herokuapp.com. Okay, this is a basic GET request. You can see it. over here from this drop-down menu if you want to set the other. So remember how I said there's a lot of other ones. Yeah, we don't really care about them for now. We just think about get and post for now. Okay. I get request to this address. If we click send, it should say hello world, right? The very standard programming first thing you see. So raise of hand who's got to that step. Who's managed to send us requests? Nice. Yeah, sure. Oh, do you want me to? I can make it bigger. Yeah, that'd be perfect. Yeah. You good? Okay. So everybody here? Cool. That's the first thing. That's a get request. Now, remember how I talked about get requests? You can use what we call parameters. So let's have a look at that, right? So this endpoint I set up over here, this basically is designed so that all the parameters you send over, it sends back to you. So let's just, don't save. I'm gonna close everything else. And let's just show this one, okay? So this is just my little dummy endpoint to test how parameters work. So the domain part, right, remember in terms of breaking down the URL, the domain does not change. It's still this. But now we're giving it a different like path, right, or a different route. So what I did is at the very end of the Roku.com, I added a slash and I added this special keyword params. That's a route that I set up. And if I send a get request to this, right, let's see what happens. It will return me the param names. And it's an empty array right now. Why is that? And that's because I did not send any parameters, right? So let's see how we add parameters here. In Postman, we can add parameters or add add key value pairs in terms of parameter and value simply by just clicking here and we add the parameters. So we say date is equal to, sorry, no, not date, day is equal to, say, Monday, right? And I activate it by clicking on the arrow. So see how it's not becoming white? That means it's activated now. And I think, I'm not sure, the Postman may be like white or like in terms of light theme for you guys. But you can just change that in the settings. It doesn't really matter. And say I send one more, let's say mood happy. Right, so I have two parameters here, two key value pairs. And notice one thing, right? Once I clicked this arrow, or sorry, this checkbox, I basically activated this parameter, right? And you see how the URL here changed, right? So that's exactly the structure of the URL that I showed you guys before. But basically, your parameters for a GET request is directly in your URL. And that's a very important thing to know, right? Because if it's directly in your URL, you can do like very shady things. So say, for example, if I have my username, it's Justin, and my password is a very safe password, like that. Notice how when I'm sending this GET request, the password is literally in the URL, right? And that's not very safe because when like URLs are cached by your browser, that basically means that if you send something once, the next time you send it, the browser kind of gives it to you faster. But your cache is not only accessible by you. Anybody else sharing your network could technically access your cache. So, you can see how this is a security issue, right? And so like in the next demo I'll show you is basically how we get around that. But for now, let's send this, right? Let's see what happens. So if I send this request, how I designed the backend to basically, what I designed it to do is basically it returns what the query is. So the query is basically the key value pairs or the param value pairs, and it gives me the names of the parameters that I used. So over here I used username, I used password. So it will give back to me username, it will give back to me password. Okay? Has everybody managed to send this request? Cool. And so it doesn't have to be this, right? I can add whatever I want. It can be like hello. It's going to be bye. I can turn this off. I send it. It'll give me hello equals bye. That's like my query. And the parameter names I sent was hello. Right? And feel free to test around with this. And there's one more thing, right? There's also a limit to how long your URL can get. And that basically limits the number of parameters or the length of the value in your parameter that you can send. So that can also be an issue, right? Say, for example, you're creating an account, right? And you want to, set up your name. But what if, say, you have a very, very, very long surname, right? And that's pretty common in some parts of the country. So, then it becomes impossible, right? Because there is a character cap on the amount of characters you can put in the URL. So we mentioned two issues, right? We mentioned security, where the URL of a GET request is cached, so other people may or may not see it. And the second, which is an actual issue, where the length of the URL is capped. So we get around that using a post request, right? In the post request, so again, the endpoint changed a little bit, right? I did networking-demo.heroku, but instead of doing params now, right? Now I'm doing /post, right? Again, this is just an endpoint I set up, right? This is just arbitrary. When you're going to do the hack challenge later on with a backend member, they're going to tell you what the endpoints are. So all you really have to do is just type it in, okay? So here we have the post, right? This is the post endpoint. Now, for example, say I want to send something over. Notice how there no longer is this kind of query params thing down here, this table here. When I'm in my post request, right? It's gone. Instead, what I have is this body here. So I guess, okay, to make it more clear, I'll just create a new one right now. So I'm gonna put this here, right? And to change by default, it's a GET request. So to change it to a post request, I click the drop down, and I click post. And I'm gonna give this a name, dummy post. Put it in here, save. So now I have a post request, right? And actually, sorry, I didn't make this clear, but the query params are still there, but we're not using it this time, right? Now we're using the body. And this is basically how we solve this issue, one, of security, and two, of this hard cap of how long the URL can get. Now when we're sending a post request, we can send a body, which can be in the form of a JSON, right? Remember we talked about JSON? And there's no limit on how long this can be, right? This can be as big as you want. And this post body, right, is not cached by the browser. And that means other people are going to have a lot harder time accessing it, right? So over here, you can actually be username, Justin. Sorry, remember JSON, these are all strings, right? Comma, and then password is my very safe password. Okay? So now if I send it, what it does, it basically returns, so this is how I set up the endpoint, but this endpoint basically returns whatever JSON I sent it, okay? Or whatever body I sent it. And one small nit here, right? Notice how this looks a bit different in how I sent it to it. This technically still is JSON. It's just formatted very ugly. And Postman is very nice and helpful. What it does is it basically allows you to prettify it, or basically format it correctly, by just clicking this drop down here. And if you click a JSON, it makes it look nicer. And basically what it did is just add tabs and spaces where it should be and formatted it to make it look nicer. But functionally, these two, or in fact these three, whatever is here is the same. Okay? Cool. And this is also really helpful later on when we talk about kind of processing the input, right? Because after you send a request, a GET request, a POST request, or whatever request, right? The server will give you some data, and basically you want to see what the structure of the data is, right? So that's what you do. You send a request through Postman, and then you kind of display it down there, and then in your actual app you will actually do some parsing, right? And we're going to get into that next lecture. So any questions about the three requests I showed you just now? The hello world, which is a very basic GET request, right? No parameters, no body, no nothing. And what it does, it just returns you hello world. Second thing I showed you was the params, right? Where I actually sent a GET request, but with some key value pairs in the parameter that appears in the URL. And the final one I showed you was this kind of post request, which basically repeats whatever I sent through the post request. Any questions with these? Cool. Now let me just delete this dummy one. Yes. And so, I guess I kind of already covered this, but this endpoint I set it up just to basically show you that not only do you send JSON, right, through this HTTP request in the body, the server also replies with JSON. right? So when it replies to you, it gives you a string, but if you decode the string, it looks like a JSON. Okay? Again, like I'm glossing over a lot of detail in terms of how this really works, but we're gonna go over we're gonna actually go into the details next lecture when we actually decode the responded data. Okay? Cool. So if nobody has any questions about this, now we're gonna get into the fun and interactive part. Okay? So I set up a endpoint here. So this is the domain or the endpoint, which is the exact same thing you've been using just now through just in the lecture demo. But now I have two new routes, which I haven't showed you guys how it works. So now it's your turn to experiment, right? And let me show you what I want you guys to do. So again, these are the two routes, right? So basically what you do is you stick the route at the end of the domain, and you start sending requests to it, okay? And you can set a get, you can set a post, you can set a delete, you can set whatever you want, right? But again, remember, I basically only went over get and post, so to kind of achieve or solve this challenge, you only need get and post. So what do I want you guys to do? So this is the message route that I showed you guys. And right now, I'm sending it a message, and it says, you'll never figure out how to change me. Now that sounds like a challenge, right? So what your task right now in the next 10 minutes is to basically try and change this text. So if any of you manage to change the text, raise your hand, and I'll click this one more time. And if it changes, you're free to go. So yeah, and let me just give some credit to where this is due. This demo was basically, I borrowed it from a class that I took here. So a lot of this is set up the same way, and I thought it was really fun when I learned this. So hopefully you guys find this fun. Okay. Oh, and if you guys have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. I can come over and help you. Sorry, I forgot the important part. Yes, sure. And I think I can make it bigger. Here you go. Would it be more helpful if I show you this one? Because those are the two routes. Okay, yeah. Yes. That's the fun part, right? But when do you send to? Yeah. So did you? Right. So the message is still this. So you want to change that. So my thing is, maybe try sending a pull request to this to the. And so yeah, some good questions, right? Remember, sending a GET request is to get data. Sending a POST request is to put data or kind of update data. So if I'm trying to change what I'm displaying right now, or to change or like update the model of what's storing here, maybe sending a POST request to the message address or the message route is a good first attempt, right? In fact, let me show you, right? What if I send a POST request right now? Ooh, it says success false, and it says I have the wrong secret/password. Now I wonder how I get the secret, right? So hopefully some people have managed to at least get the secret or get the password. So I'll just show that part first. So remember how I gave you guys two routes, the message route where I kind of get my message, and the secret route, right? Which I wonder what it does. Let's see what it does, right? When I send a GET request to this secret route with no key, no value, it returns false. Oh no, right? What's going on? Let me move this here. It says, please include your name and net ID, and you'll get a in your GET request. So how do I do that? Remember, right? In GET requests, we use we put things in the URL in terms of query parameters. So the key here would be name and net ID, and you put whatever you want, right? You can be like Justin, Jan537, and if I send this, it gives me true. So I get this secret string. Now, where do I want to use this secret string? Notice when I was sending the POST request earlier, it says false, wrong secret password, try again. Now in the body of my GET request, I would want to send basically JSON. So sorry, I'm not sure if I showed this, but when you're sending something in the body, you want to make sure that this is JSON so that it gives you like highlighting, right? It's like hello, and then value. This is something like that, right? As opposed to just doing text, or it's just like one long string. Okay, so someone asked me just now, right, what I want to kind of put here. Now, let me just give this part away. But you want to send some message, right? So new message, and over here, you want to basically put your secret. Okay? And you put your secret in here. So now if you try sending a post request with the correct values, you might be able to update the actual message. Nice. So someone managed to change it. Well done. And I guess everyone else can keep attempting. I'll just stand here and keep refreshing. But if you manage to update the text, you're free to go. And that's really the end of the lecture. So I guess as you guys keep trying, nice, new message. So I'll just recap what we learned today, right? Today we learned about networking. We learned about the basic idea of how we do networking, right? In terms of clients and servers, in terms of request and response. And we also learned the standardized way of kind of sending data back and forth, right? That's the idea of JSON. So we have a model, say it's a restaurant model, say it's a song model, say it's an email model. I turn that model into JSON, and that bit of data is sent back and forth using these get and post and a bunch of other HTTP requests. Now when the server responds, they also give me some information and wrapped in the form of JSON. Now how do I parse this data? How do I use this data in my app? That's something we're going to cover tomorrow. Oh, not tomorrow, on Wednesday. Okay? Cool. So I hope you had fun with this demo. That's the end of the lecture, and you're free to go.